My name is Alexi Boyd, and as the conversation curator, I create engaging and conversational content with your expert guests through panel moderation, interviews, and fair and equitable discussions. So with local councils needing to meet community needs, ensuring stringent health and safety guidelines, maintaining community trust, operating as a distributed workforce, understanding how lean methodologies can help each council meet their strategic objectives through efficient practices in reducing waste is what we're here about today. Our expert panel will share experiences through local, government and international insights on strategies that have been successfully implemented across councils and how these strategies have produced positive impact through organisational culture, development and learning. Professional growth opportunities are there for everyone as well, and streamlined departmental processes. We're going to take an honest look and hopefully a good, robust discussion at the current state of local government and what it will take to reach a future where continuous improvement is top of mind for each and every employee in servicing the needs of our community. So let's first learn about our guests. Stephen Head is the General Manager at Hornsby Shire Council. He's been there since 2018. Prior to that, he was the Head of Network 7 the Head of Network Sydney. It's a completely different kettle of fish. Head of Network Sydney at Roads and Maritime Service. Most of Stephen's career has been in local government, including time at Ku-ring-gai Council, Parramatta and Willoughby. He's a passionate supporter of the role of local government in improving local community outcomes. Wes Anderson is the Manager of Financial and Treasury Services at the City of Mississauga. Now, Wes, you're going to have to correct me on how to pronounce that because I should have schmoogled it, but Mississauga, I think, is right, in Canada. He's responsible for banking, cash management, payroll, payables, investment portfolio and accounting needs for Canada's 6th largest city. Previously, he was the Lean Program Manager at the city for 4 years, including the largest Lean transformation in Canadian municipal government and engaging staff from the front line to executives in building a culture of continuous improvement. He spent his entire career with the city, working in a number of departments, and believes that local government impacts the day-to-day lives of community more than any other level. I think everybody who's listening today would agree with you, Wes. Joanne Jacobs is the co-CEO at Disruptors Co. She's an award-winning digital strategist and company director, and she's the co-CEO with Gavin Heaton of Disruptors Co., a firm that facilitates incubation of innovation in enterprise and creators of the Air.works. She's an industry fellow at the University of Tech Sydney, and she's an active mentor of startups. In her career, she's worked in London, where she ran social media production house. She's been a consultant in social networking tech, as well as a professional speaker, business coach, trainer, and strategist for digital marketing practices. Everyone, welcome. I am personally very excited about today's panel. I have a very deep passion about the way that council works and the way we can all work together as a community to improve the lives of those we care so much about. But I think what's going to be fascinating about today's discussion is really understanding the mechanics and how these sometimes giant places in which you guys operate and you work and you manage can be done more efficiently. And I think everybody needs efficiency in their lives, whether they're a government or not. So let's start with you, Wes. I'm interested in the idea about lean methodology. So let's learn from you about the implementation of the process at the City of Mississauga in Canada. And did I say Mississauga right?
It's Mississauga.
Yeah, completely wrong. Mississauga.
Rolls off the tongue beautifully.
Yeah. Well, thank you and welcome. It's great to have you here. So tell us about the project and how it rolled out, please, Wes.
So to start off, a question that I actually get that's not as easy an answer that everybody thinks it is well, what is lean? And sort of the nice part about the industry that we work in, the methodology, is that there's no one governing global body. There's no standard that we follow, kind of like project management with PMI. So you kind of get to create something that works for your audience. And so my personal definition of lean and what we've rolled out at the City of Mississauga is that it's a way of work. It's not something you just do on Tuesdays. It's designed to give your customers exactly what they want when they need it with zero waste in the process. There's nothing in that definition about cost cutting, specific tools. It's the way an organization operates, a shared belief, a culture that delights our customers and delivers better services. And a key point that I also want to make is it's not specific to an individual industry. So this myth that it is strictly, segmented only to manufacturing is wrong. And when you think about local government, either here in Canada, or I'm sure in Australia, local government's responsible for such a broad, diverse portfolio. And the line I always use is we're the Johnson and Johnson of government organizations. We basically do everything. We handle public transit, fire services, building permits, libraries, recreation, 350 distinct lines of business. And a difficult question I get is, well, how do you define a shared vision around continuous improvement across and paint such a broad brush? And it comes down to, if you define lean as a way of work, as a language around continuous improvement and a way of delighting our taxpayers, that's something any industry can kind of be a part of. And so we started our program back in 2014 as a way to kind of see if this would actually work in local government. We picked a really simple process. How do you pick up garbage in parks? So really kind of simple and straightforward. So we improved pickup frequency by 25%, reduced costs by $160,000. And since then, we've done 250 major projects, 6,000 just do it daily improvements. There's small improvements on people's daily work, and we've avoided and saved $25 million and freed up the capacity of about 220 staff. There's no secret solution. There's no one solution that kind of fits all, but it's about people coming together, identifying how we can work smarter and how we give them a safe space to do it and provide the knowledge so that they can actually describe what improvement is.
I'm fascinated to know about your particular note there about costs cutting, because I think the fear is that when you mention lean strategy or something about making everything run more efficiently, that people immediately feel that there's got to be jobs lost or there's going to be projects cut. So I guess I'm wondering, how do you explain or roll out a system, just sort of philosophically, to explain to your staff that this isn't about cost cutting or job cutting, it's about the lean methodology? How do you explain that to them?
So we committed at the beginning of our program that no one would lose their job, that this was sort of a safe space to challenge our processes. And the old adage that I was using throughout is that lean doesn't stand for less employees are needed. And as long as you're able to kind of build that culture and create those safe spaces to challenge your day-to-day work, the rest is not necessarily trivial, but the rest will come over time. And that includes various levels of training and coaching and the methodology that we've rolled out. This is a program about empowerment more than myself or someone coming in and telling, staff and telling others how to do their jobs. Those that do the work are the best positioned to be able to make the change. And the evidence our city has through the success of our program proves this to be true. And we've done work on speeding up the time staff respond to the scene of a fire, how we clean buses, development applications, and kind of everything in between. There hasn't really been an area that we think is immune to thinking about working smarter and delivering really on what customers want. So as long as you create those safe spaces and build those internal structures and networks that gives people the opportunity to challenge and creates a language on how they can describe how to do their work better, the rest falls into place over time.
It's interesting to hear how you explain that to your staff. It's so important to have everybody on board with the process in terms of that approach. I want to go to you now, Joanne, because in the prep we were talking about your experience with not only rolling out this lean methodology with government organisations, but also with enterprise. Is there any difference fundamentally with rolling it out in a corporate versus a government structure?
There can be, and a lot of that comes down to what the objectives are for adopting lean. I mean, we have to remember that lean is about customer-driven improvements. So it's improving productivity and reducing waste. And when we're talking about the delivery of this kind of platform, there are going to be innovations that are created, bridges that help something that didn't work terribly efficiently become more efficient. So if you're going to roll out to public sector in comparison to enterprise, what you're really doing is creating the best experience for citizenry, for the community. When you talk about enterprise, it's not necessarily about cost reduction, although cost reduction is often an outcome that comes from this. Sometimes it is about improving the productivity of the people that you have and the resources that you have. So in an enterprise context, the difficulty is usually about ensuring that you get everybody on board. And the more complex an organisation is, the more difficult it can become, particularly if you've got stakeholders and supply chains and everything that is actually going to be impacted by an adoption of lean. But in public sector, it's sort of a natural fit in many respects, because the taxpayers want better value for their tax dollars. They want the service providers to be efficient. So it makes sense that we do the same thing, that we ensure that that we continuously improve, that we continuously change and scale up productivity.
And it's almost as though you're saying it's customer-driven change in implementation. But for me, it's sounding as though the customers in part are the workplace and the people that you're working around. You also need to bring them on board with this strategy as well. And I guess that's a bit of a selling point in the enterprise as well as local government. Could I ask you in that rollout, in your opinion, is it better to have a top-down approach with this strategy, or a collaborative approach with everybody deciding how they want it to roll out for each department? Which is best?
You need to have grassroots. It needs to be bottom up. It certainly needs the leadership to support it. If you don't have that leadership support, then people don't perceive it as being part of an organisation-wide rollout. It becomes a pilot. It becomes an innovation that happens over there in that little room over there. It doesn't happen across the business at large. So you do need to have support. But unless everybody within the organisation adopts lean principles, they may not be a particular methodology, as Wes has actually suggested, but unless everybody adopts the principles, you do not have the kind of improvements that Wes has been able to observe in his organisation.
And I wanted to ask you as well, in our prep, we were talking about outcome development versus capability development. Could you explain those two processes and how they fit into the lean strategy?
Yeah, so I mean, again, when we come back to this innovation process, you've got little tools, little processes that are improving that productivity, right? So they're little bridges that sit in between. They're actually outputs that come from this kind of lean adoption process. Capability is about the staff. Staff become used to these processes. They get quite comfortable with a continuous innovation sort of cycle. That process, when it becomes business as usual, it stops being about a change. And what we want is that staff capability development to improve, so that they are constantly looking for opportunities to improve productivity and reduce waste. That's capability development. Outcome development is just the tools or just the processes that you create in order to be able to generate that productivity improvement.
So I see it's got to be that collaborative approach, but I guess the processes and procedures are the outcomes that you're trying to improve on. Wes, is that something you would agree on with the big rollout that you had at your council in Canada? Is that the approach that you had with bringing people on board and the rollout of the process, those outcome-based strategies, I guess?
Our change can be characterized really as bottom-up driven, top-down supported. It can't be a simple executive mandate that says thou shalt be more efficient and thou shalt streamline operations. You have to give the infrastructure to be able to support those results. And as I mentioned earlier, the safe space to be able to challenge assumptions and the status quo. It can become extremely uncomfortable to be able to challenge the way things have been done for 20 years, just because that's the way things have been done. And really breaking through that takes a bit of a leap of faith in staff and an organization as a whole to be able to achieve. And it's a big challenge, and it takes a lot of trust, and it takes a lot of trust building over time from executives, from your de facto leader in this, whether it's a dedicated position myself or a manager trying to influence their team. It takes time to build that trust and to lead those challenges forward.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity to bring in Stephen. Stephen, you're, of course, the GM at Hornsby Shire Council at the moment, and you've worked in leadership teams for decades. What's the current landscape for Australian local councils? What does a typical council look like?
Yeah, thanks, Alexia. I just thanks very much for the opportunity to be here today, and it's quite cathartic. I think actually listening to both Wes and Joanne talking about some of what they were just outlining, and quite inspirational. I think the answer to what local government looks like today is challenging. It's as challenging as it's ever been, and I think it's going to be even more so going forward. I mean, I've often talked about how the wonderful mess that is local government. It's this conglomeration of 50, 60 businesses, usually in an Australian context. We don't have quite the range of services that our friends in Canada provide at local government, although with cost shifting from state and federal government, it feels like we'll get there soon enough, maybe. But look, I think the challenges for local government and what we're facing, I mean, financial, it's the one thing that probably drives just so much of our conversations. We're just, like everyone, we're just expected to do so much more with genuinely less and less every year. Of course, in New South Wales, we have what's called a rate cap, where our main source of revenue, our rates, the rate that they can increase at is capped every year, and our costs generally increase it somewhat more than that. And so that's been somewhat of a challenge for us. And I think that aligns closely then with the changing expectations of our community. We often hear that term, roads, rates and rubbish, and they're as important as ever. But it's about so much more than that. You look at our presence around things such as environmental management, sustainability, trying to manage climate change, the different businesses that we get into these days. You've got this incredibly changing expectation, and having the culture and the capability within your teams and within your organisation to be able to fit that. And it's what I really like listening to both Wes and Joanne and their experiences around what they talk about lean. It feels a little bit like it's an everyday thing in local government. If you're not sort of adopting and utilising some of the principles that are being talked about, you really just don't stand much of a chance of progressing. I look at what we here in Hornsby are doing today with what is about 500 staff that we have. And it was funny, only last night in a workshop with councillors, we were reflecting that it's only 10 years ago that we had almost 700 staff. Yet today we provide incredibly more in the way of services, and I would argue far better delivery to our community, but we're doing it with far less resources than we used to have. So I think local government is challenging. It's incredibly fun. We are at that point where the community are genuinely interested in what we do and are very passionate about telling us when we get it wrong and when we get it right, for that matter. And that's great. So I think they're probably for me some of the key things that are challenging us at the moment. Just in the context of lean, I always like to talk about three things. For me, it's all about, I call it the 3 C's. I go customer, culture and coin. And I just think for me that encapsulates so much of what's both valuable and what's challenging in local government.
Yes, and it's interesting what you were saying about at the beginning with it being a whole group of organisations, and you're continually asked to change and develop and evolve with what the community requires and expects of you. You're always going under that, you're always evolving with the way that the council is behaving and responding to needs. How can you also implement a big structural, or not structural, but just a change like lean management when everything is always in a constant state of flux? How do you imagine that would work, Stephen?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Probably describe 7 o'clock on a Monday morning through to late on a Friday night. But I think sometimes it's about sort of trying to work with your council, with your community, with your staff, trying to be sort of value driven, understanding what the proposition is that we provide to our community, trying to get a clear sense of what the community actually want, and just trying to, I suppose, you have to be prepared to be flexible in how we go about delivering things. But it's a case of trying to create some stability for your staff, for your teams, and for your community, for that matter, I think is really important. So sometimes that becomes, I think, the role of leadership in this sort of lean methodology process, if you like, is about supporting what's coming up from your team, supporting what the community are pushing you to try and do, and try and sort of navigate the most, the best path forward. And, look, that's not always a straight line, as I think we all well know. At some days there's a lot of sideways steps involved.
And I can see the way that you're describing it is a large team to manage. It would be difficult at the best of times. Now, just to take a break, I just want everybody to remember that there's the chat function within the WebEx. Please, I encourage you to put questions up there as they pop into your head for each of our panelists, if there's something specific you'd like them to answer, and we'll get to those as part of the discussion, not necessarily at the end. So as they pop into your head, pop them up there, because we've got a real breadth of knowledge here with all of our experts. Now, turning to you, Joanne and Wes, a question for both of you, and I'll start with you, Wes. The practicalities of lean training, what timelines are realistic for those changes to occur? And you mentioned that you started with one department. Is that the best approach, and how long can you expect this process to take?
Sorry, I was muted on there for a second. We characterized it by starting small and using our small project on waste management as a showcase pilot over to the rest of the organization to be able to explain the benefits of the methodology and how it can actually apply to them. I'm a firm believer that 1,000 improvements that save $1 is much more sustainable in the long run than one improvement that saves $1,000. When you think about massive organizational transformations, implementation of ERP systems, big strategic plans, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. There's a lot of things that change over time. There's a lot of scope creep. There's a lot of cost increases that are associated with this. I like to start small and expand and build the umbrella and build that guiding that burning coalition over time. And I think the greatest way to do that is kind of start with a small petri dish, demonstrate the benefits of everything, and let that propagate over time, and allow that to happen organically. There's nothing worse than an executive saying, well, it worked over in Parks, it must work for you, so find a way to be able to make it work. Allow the organization to organically achieve what it's going to achieve over time, but nurture kind of those I'll use a lame analogy, nurture the seeds, feed it, water it, provide those safe spaces, build, the coaching, the training, the support systems in place, and you'll see the growth over time. We have a pretty comprehensive belt program where all staff, regardless if you're unionized, non-unionized, part-time, full-time, you receive introductory training on lean upon hire. It is part of our core competencies. It is built into performance agreements as a not to be able to meet a target, but it's one of your sort of overarching competencies on how you do your work on a daily basis. So staff are evaluated on it, and building those mechanisms around the organization is what has really led to our success. It doesn't happen overnight. We're a mature organization that we're in year 7 of our journey, but that comes with time. I think to start off, you start local, you start small, and you propagate it from there.
Joanne, where would you say the biggest changes are to be expected with the lean continuous improvement and business process improvement process?
I think if you talk about in a public sector context, I think the opportunities usually are in dealing with what we call a problem worth solving. So it's not just a problem that has been identified, but in fact a problem that has been keeping someone up at night. People have tried and failed to improve whatever it is before. So it's kind of an embedded problem within the organisation. When you start with that, you actually generate, to refer to what Wes was talking about there in terms of the rollout, you start to generate FOMO. You get people who have fear of missing out, the fear of not actually being part of this kind of process. So actually starting in areas where there are obvious problems that have been lasting a long time, and that when you can actually show and demonstrate the improvement really, really quickly and really communicate that across the organisation, you're far better off.
Stephen, do you think that having that example where you've got it in one department or one sector of the organisation and then rolling it out to others and using that as an example, does that realistically work in the Australian Council context, in your opinion?
Yeah, look, absolutely. In fact, I think it's almost essential that we do it in that way. I really like the way that Wes and Joanne, for that matter, talked about just starting with something small. A petri dish that Wes talked about, plant a seed, I often talk about, and just water it every now and then. And it's amazing how soon people come to you with this great idea. And, that's probably one of the most enjoyable parts of leadership, is when people start telling you the thing that you've been maybe ineptly trying to tell them for quite some time. So I think that's the point that I start defining success.
You mentioned people there, so I wonder how, what sort of foundations do you have to lay with the culture in such a large organisation to make sure that people are open to these sort of strategies and will grab it and say, oh, this is something that I really want to do. How do you, from a top-down approach, make sure the culture's there in the first place to people to engage in this new idea?
Well, the first thing I'd say is culture is always an ongoing discussion, but I think Wes used a great word a bit earlier. He talked about trust and he talked about safety and security. And I think if you can create that trusting environment, and I know a number of changes, lean type changes that I've been able to implement over the years, the beginning of the conversation is, there is not one person in this team who we will not be talking to in 6 months' time. In other words, you will all still be here. We might change a little bit the way that we do something. We might even be doing something completely different, but I'm not going to lose one of you through this process. And I think that really helps the culture and that helps build the trust. And if you can demonstrate small wins for everybody, maybe even sometimes it's about solving a problem that your team have rather than your customer or your community. If you can maybe just build that little bit of success, often, nothing builds success like success. So I really, a couple of the points that Wes and Joanne have really resonated with me. I think if I think of some of the successful and maybe the less than successful changes I've been involved in, the successful ones tend to be characterised by what Wes and Joanne are talking about.
Yeah, and it almost feels as though innately that it's a part of every successful strategy, but I guess putting that process around it really helps. Joanne, we've got a question that's popped into the Q&A box about time. Everyone, it doesn't matter if you're a small business or a large business or a multinational corporate, everyone is stretched for time. So how do you convince, I guess, teams and management, middle management, upper management, and people that the time invested in this will ultimately be worthwhile?
So I think the way that we've done this in the past, because we do this a lot with organisations across the board, is to actually get people invested in creating the solutions themselves. So everybody has change fatigue. Everybody in every industry has change fatigue. They're sick of it. They don't like the idea of having to adopt something new. There is the concern about losing the jobs, particularly. I mean, I've been doing agile coaching for years as well, and project managers in particular get very, very worried about their jobs under those kinds of circumstances. But if you can actually get the people who are suffering from the pain of a problem, if they're on the front line of it, if there's a really clear line between solving this problem and them having a better way of life or a better job or a better engagement with the community, then that time investment is never a problem. You shouldn't be thinking about allocating time to this issue. You should actually be thinking about reducing the amount of time it takes for someone to be able to develop the capabilities. This is why we talk about rapid prototyping. This is why we talk about hackathons. This is why we use methods that mean that you only really have to spend a day or two for someone to learn some of the basics of these processes, and then you keep practicing it. And you keep practicing it, and you keep practicing it. And then it becomes business as usual. It becomes normal. So the time investment really should be as small as possible to begin with by doing rapid prototyping, and then the rollout comes from that.
And it's almost like you need a bit of an internal PR campaign by the sounds of it as well, to explain that this change is for good, and this change, you don't need to be fearful of it, and it's not just another cost-cutting, job-cutting exercise.
Yeah, and I think also the issue that you have to do when it comes to communicating is celebrating the success of those people who've actually done those things as well. So I think that combination of communicating the long-term commitment to lean principles, but also celebrating the short-term successes, I think is a useful communication strategy.
Wes, can I ask you a question? It's something that came up in the prep that I was quite intrigued by, was this concept of a co-design of the methodology. Could you explain what you mean by that, and just the way to have the necessity to have all the stakeholders on board? What do you mean by a co-design of a methodology like this?
Talked a lot about, those that do the work are best positioned to be able to make the change in the process. You need to be able to bring them along and share a practical language and a practical program with practical results. And so one of the most important things I thought we really did was really communicate a simple question, because a lot of groups asked, what is efficiency? What does it mean to streamline? Or when an executive comes to us and says, we need to do more with less, streamline our work. And these kind of management mandates that don't really have a clear objective or a good way of interpreting it. So the answer to that is, you as a business don't get to define what efficiency is. You need to work with those that do the work. You need to identify and work with your customers to identify what they want. And to answer the question, efficiency can be defined as cheap, fast, and good. Everybody wants low cost, high quality, and fast delivery speed. How you prioritize those three things often might come into conflict with one another, but you want to be able to work with those that are actually receiving the good, the service, the thing that the local government is providing you, and from there build upon that and continuously and incrementally improve the work, so that your building permit gets processed faster, or your grass cutting happens on a more frequent basis. The most important thing I always kind of leave with people is that you, as an employee, as a staff member, as a consultant, as whomever, you don't get to define efficiency. Your customers do. And having that working relationship with your customers is so critical, because they define everything. They're the ones, at least in my world, paying our taxes, paying our user fees, paying our development charges, and everything is ultimately designed for them. And we take such pride in local government in creating something that impacts so many people in very vulnerable positions sometimes. It's very value-added work, and how can we continuously strive to deliver what they want?
You mentioned that you've been doing this for a number of years, and I'm just wondering, how do you monitor the success of that from your key stakeholders, being the community that you're serving?
You can measure it quantitatively just by evaluating the key performance indicators on a single project. So for example, if you pick garbage pickup, how frequently is the pickup happening? What's the labor cost inputs related to how much time it takes to do your route? But it's also measured by citizen satisfaction surveys, where our survey scores have been going up substantially since the implementation of the Lean program. It can be measured by voice of customer exercises. So when you're talking and soliciting feedback, and community engagement exercises are going on, you're getting real kind of live feedback on the go. And I've been in local government now 16 years, and they're never afraid to tell you the truth about how your process is doing. No one's ever.
That sounds like that's worldwide as well. I think Stephen's got that. I think everyone understands it. The councils are very much in the firing line with hearing how they're doing from their constituents.
I think the good word is, I pay your salary, and
yes.
so you go from there. But it's a very valid point, and that customer and business relationship is so important to be able to nurture and grow, but to also have those pulse checkpoints on a regular basis, both on a quantitative side, so having strong analytics in place, and there's a whole subset of the methodology on that, but also having the qualitative factors and examining how our customers, how our residents are feeling, how our local businesses are feeling.
Look, this is a great chat that we've got coming in through the questions. Thank you so much, everybody. I've got one from Trudy here. And I think this was a good one for you, Joanne. It seems like these principles should be a no-brainer. I'm looking at this from the small business lens and thinking the same thing for all organisations. So why isn't it already part of every organisation's DNA?
Partly because of the fact that there have been some pretty monumental failures of implementation of lean. There was a piece of research that was published about 5 years ago now that looked at Lean Six Sigma and lean implementations, and I think there were about 56 implementations that were studied, and about 34 of them failed. And they failed because of the fact that not everyone within the organisation had adopted the principles. You know, there were some divisions that were saying, oh, I understand lean, you know, that's important, but it doesn't apply to me because I'm doing cost-oriented stuff and I'm in accountancy and I need to actually focus on that kind of things. And the way we've done things before is working and it ain't broke, so why should we fix it? The reason why it's not part of every organisation's DNA is because of the fact that there have been sufficient instances of failure for people to say, okay, no, too hard, I'm going to go back to the way things were before, because legally it makes sense to do things the way you've been doing it before, because, and that's what the shareholders ask for, or the citizens in the case of public sector. And you've also got a problem where there are some organisations that are so embedded and invested in previous systems that the return on investment of going to a lean process is going to take too long for them to actually consider it being worthy of their attention. The reality, though, is that in the long run, if people do not pursue the lean principle approach, eventually they are going to be disrupted. I come from a company called Disruptors Co. What we do is actually, look at where disruption can occur. And often it is because there are these entrenched systems and there are people who don't really want to change.
Yeah, it's the dinosaur organisations first that seem to crumble, isn't it, with the disruptor situation? And I suppose if you've got a particular sector or a section of your organisation that's unwilling to move, they're the dinosaurs and they need to be moved. And it goes back to what you were saying a little bit about internal PR and the need to bring everybody on board with it. Yes. So the implementation, it sounds like, is absolutely crucial, and getting everybody on board is crucial. So there's almost a lean methodology for the implementation of the lean methodology.
Oh yes. So there certainly does require, and that's why I talk about that grassroots and leadership. You need that top level support, but you need that undercurrent, that grassroots, everybody feeling like that they want to be part of this. This is the FOMO I'm talking about. You want people to be fearing about not being part of this process. You don't want people to say, oh, it happens over there, it doesn't apply to me. You want them to say, how can I do this? How can I change the way that I work? How can I create better value? How can I do what is needed by my customer?
Stephen, could I ask you, speaking about, where it doesn't work, what would you say would be the typical concerns of, say, an Australian council in the idea of implementing lean in their area?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and look, Joanne just talked a lot about something I think is really important, is about having support from the top, but you've got to have your team sort of, invested in the process, whether they're driving it, and sometimes they're not, because I think one of the things in council is being quite frank, often the demand doesn't come from inside or even from the leadership of the organisation. It often comes from the community on a particular issue, and you have to be responsive to what happens. So if sometimes you have this bit of a situation where the organisation feels, oh, we've done it this way for the last 25 years, it worked in 1987, why can't it work in 2028 and 2029? What's so wrong? So trying to build a bit of a platform of the need for change and what it is that you're trying to do. And I suppose we like to try and talk about future proofing a little bit ourselves. And whilst you can never be future proof, because none of us, hey, COVID, is enough to say, none of us know what's going to happen in the future. But trying to prepare ourselves so we can be more flexible in our approach and be more amenable to change suggestions, whether they come from external to the organisation, from an area of the organisation where you might be getting leadership, but they're not actually part of your formal leadership team. Building support amongst your entire executive, and that can be really challenging on some days. I have to say, and so now getting the support of, sometimes an idea comes to me, and at first I'm not the least bit interested, if I'm being really honest. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Someone needs to take the petri dish approach with senior leaders, including myself. And over time, we come to realise, yes, actually, that would be better. Let's lower the resistance levels and let's actually start investing. So I think that it's just, to me, it seems to be, it's about people and bringing people along for the journey, whether they're community, your own work teams, or even your senior colleagues with you. I think if you can get that happening, and really, who cares then whether the idea comes from, as long as it's a good one, let's have a good discussion about it and see if we can make it work.
Is the digital team, do they tend to be leaders in this, in terms of the first team that are comfortable with a lean strategy? Is digital a good place to start?
I think it's a necessary place to start, but sometimes even your if I can call them your IT people, sometimes they're pretty comfortable with the systems that they've invested a lot of time and effort into as well. So again, it's about having some champions, and where I'm sort of seeing some of the results that we're starting to get in some areas is where a couple of new people have come in. They're bringing some fresh ideas to the table, and they're starting to champion some of these ideas. And I think for us, COVID was a real lesson in how to do, how to much more effectively do business online. And we found some really quite significant gains in efficiencies for ourselves, where we're processing lots of our applications faster than we ever were before. It seems like the anecdotal feedback from customers is, generally better responses, to us, a better sentiment. So that's becoming an area, but it was probably born out of necessity in the first instance. And luckily for us, the arrival of a couple of new people in our most recent example here.
Yeah, people can be a big effector of change as well. Wes, can I just ask you, with your experience having been through this long and continuous process, which of your departments were more likely to embrace the change, and which ones had the most concerns about it?
The ones that had the most concerns were the ones that feel that have, I'll characterize it as if they've been burned before. They've brought ideas forward to their leaders, and their leaders just shut them down and said, "Thank you very much. Now go do your job." And breaking through those barriers took a lot of time to be able to kind of nurture the culture a little bit and understand that an approach is going to be different, both for the employees and for the leaders, who were often resistant to be able to say, "Well, I've got a process that isn't broken. Why fix it?" And when you ask their customers, it's actually true. I want to go back to talking about digital teams that Stephen sort of touched on a little bit, because sometimes it becomes more difficult to implement transformation work in IT settings because they believe that the only solution can come from a digital change. They believe that a new ERP solution or new technology is going to solve every problem that we've ever had. And so the line that we always try to strive for was innovate before you automate, because everyone believes that the idea that a new model or a new system is going to solve every single problem. But the problem is, you can automate waste. You can automate a poor process, it remains poor, and it doesn't deliver upon customer value. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of the engagements that we've done within the city, we actually banned IT implementations as a solution until you identified how you're going to make the process better. There's 4 parts to every lean engagement that you do: people, process, culture, then technology. And we always emphasize that the technology went fourth. You need to be able to help. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was just going to jump in and actually reinforce that point. It's funnily enough, just yesterday, one of our teams, one of our asset operational teams, asked me to come out for a site inspection, which I thought, yeah, great. I always love getting out to see the team. I get out there, and most of the team know I'm pretty fond of cycling. One of the guys turns up to the site on a new e-bike. And he's a guy who basically, this is a tech officer, probably 5th, 6th level down in the organisation. He's come up with a process whereby, if he was allowed to be able to ride a bike to go and do the inspections of the 22,000 drainage pits that we have, he could effectively complete the entire circuit in 2 months, and it used to take him 18 months doing it by foot, and just look, it cost us $1,000, I think, for a new e-bike. It took him, and he did all this work by himself. It took him about 3 months to convince our work health and safety team that he could be trusted to ride a bike out on the road, and have a ruggedized, laptop sitting in a basket on the back. I don't know, all of those bits and pieces. But literally, they kicked it off yesterday, and they dragged me out to site to show it. And look, it's again, technology is part of the solution there, because it's the laptop, etc. But the fact is, it's an age-old bike that's actually going to get him around our neighbourhood that much quicker. Really minor thing. We've seen a massive drop, as I understand, from the work that he's been doing the last couple of months, because he's proactively out there finding all of the block drains and gutters that exist around the place, and we're getting them cleaned in advance of the storms that usually give us flooding and potentially, where water ends up going through people's homes. Really, really minor thing, but really significant result for our customers. And look, it came from the ground up. Had nothing. There was not one executive was involved in any part of the process, and really, it didn't involve IT. But I think what a great solution it was.
Yeah, great example of that grassroots approach. Joanne, how do you foster that culture to make sure that people feel comfortable to go to the GM and say, hey, I've got this great idea?
So the solution to that is the same as my response to the tech issue. The reason why tech people think that their existing solution works really well is because they sit in isolation. Our biggest problem within businesses at the moment is lack of cooperation between cross-functional teams. If you have a much more flat hierarchy, if you are finding that people are talking to each other, giving them the opportunity to solve problems together, then you will find that people will talk to other groups. They'll talk to the general manager. They'll talk to other departmental heads. They will feel more comfortable doing that because they are working together across cross-functional units. So that's actually part of this whole rubbish about, putting a suggestion box in an organisation is one of the worst possible solutions ever in the history of time. It doesn't work. You get people saying, I want to have more chocolate biscuits in the staff room. That's the kind of thing that it's nonsense. You need to have problems worth solving. You need to give people the opportunity to actually connect with others. And the interesting thing is that we found with some of the really deep tech issues that we've dealt with in the past is there is a sense of distrust from the tech community that anyone else will understand the problem from their perspective. And what we found that by producing these little rapid prototyping engagements where you get these cross-functional teams to work together, suddenly these really deep geeks turn around and say, I didn't believe anyone would be able to understand the problem. I didn't believe that anyone else would be able to look at this so differently. And when you get the trust from them, when you get the trust from the IT community that other people can actually help solve those problems, you will get people who will start to say, okay, I want to talk to the boss about this. I want to talk to the head of department. I want to talk to the GM.
So from a practical perspective, we talked about time before and that fear of having to, give up time to make everything more lean. How much time do you suggest is allocated to these cross-departmental chats? Does it need to be allocated or should it happen organically?
It will happen organically eventually, but it takes some practice for it to get to that stage. I mean, Wes says he's in year 7. I mean, I'd be interested to hear from him how long it took him for people to actually start to talk across departments organically. But it's allocation in order to create that trust. And it does, as everybody says, as Stephen's been saying, as Wes been saying, it takes time for that trust to come through. But you start by allocating, but you then the ball starts rolling and it becomes business as usual.
Wes, how long does it take?
We're on year 7. We're still not there yet. No, the idea that one of the things I always caution people on is you are not lean. You are never going to be. The whole idea about continuous improvement is that it is continuous. So you're never going to hear from me saying that the city of Mississauga has accomplished every goal that it intends to achieve on cross-functional relationships, on process improvement, on reducing lead time and maximizing our tax dollar. There is always more that we can do. What I can say is that we do have, a program and an established approach towards getting groups that normally wouldn't talk together to come together and identifying along that value stream how work gets delivered to the end customer. A good example is, for any planning application that goes through, you have park planners, you have transportation planners, you've got planners, you've got, urban designers. Everybody would be really, really efficient on their own little island. But when you're looking at those individual silos, and their waste begins to creep up, waiting time happens between those individual silos, and suddenly the departments that feel really, really efficient because they're able to get their comments or their drawings back really quickly, the customer ends up waiting 6 months to do that. And so those looking at our work horizontally across what the customer sees and what we call in this world the value stream, rather than the silo, which is your organizational structure and your org design, are two completely different things. And there's really good content as you kind of dig into the methodology and learn more about the concept of what's called flow efficiency and maximizing flow versus, being really, really good at one tiny little part of the process.
Could you explain that flow efficiency as an example?
So the idea behind, there's a reverb. The idea behind flow is that when we eliminate non-value-added activities and all we're left is with value-added work, that we deliver it to our customer as quickly as possible. So we had a really interesting project with our planning applications where it would go through 4 different sets of review teams individually as in a silo, and it took 12 weeks to do approximately 30 hours of work. So those 30 hours are really, really efficient, but over that span of time makes it not seem too efficient across in the eyes of the customer. It's actually 98% of the time is spent waiting for something that only takes 2% of the time to do. So what did we do? We combined the teams. We introduced cross-functional teams to be able to review planning applications all at the same time. So instead of passing the application from one team to another, we brought the people together on one application. Then when they're done, they move to the next application and the next one and the next one. So that concept, which is called flow efficiency, really has transformed how people look at their work. And they're not looking at it as, how can I be more efficient? It's how can I deliver cheaper, faster, better quality deliverables to my customer.
Thank you. That's an awesome example. That's great. Now, just to finish up with process, I'm sure that one question that all of the audience is asking is about budgets. So I wanted to ask, there's a great question here about talking about tapping into lean training. Is it realistic to be able to tap into, say, training budgets to enable local councils to do this training as a team or as an organisation? Stephen, is that one pathway?
I'd say yes. Like with every budget we have, everything is stretched, and really it comes down to priorities. And I think in the end, where I think it's got to become part of your culture. And I'd say we've actually got a way to go in that space yet. If you make it a priority, if you make it part of the culture of the organisation, then people's own requests, let alone the training that we sort of try and focus on as an organisation, becomes more fixed around that. We've spent a lot of time in this organisation on values and on collaboration across the organisation, because we perceive that that's where some of the weaknesses were. A lot of the lean sort of type thing has happened more incidentally with some support here and there. I think for us to really sort of make the gains that we'll need to in coming years, and I've talked about the financial challenges, if nothing else, we will need to start to focus more in that area and prioritise some of our training, I think, to lean and really embedding it more as a driven value in the organisation. We're not quite there yet, I don't think.
Joanne, where do you see organisations like councils and in fact corporate or larger organisations tap into for the funding for this sort of rollout?
Well, I would reduce the amount of funding that is spent on Big Four consultancy firms on very large reports that no one reads. There's a huge amount of opportunities for savings there as a start. L&D is learning and development and people and culture. is an obvious opportunity. We all do have to spend a certain amount of budget per year on training. So have a look at what you're currently studying, what your staff are currently doing in terms of their training program, and start to think about whether or not there needs to be this consistent investment in the previous courses and programs that you've been looking at. But use the lean principle to find where that budget should be. Consider perhaps whether or not the investments that you're making, particularly large investments with agencies like mine. So I'm basically undercutting my own business here, but basically, if you can reduce some of your investment in those and then dedicate that budget to improving efficiencies for the organisation, the return on investment will come much faster because of the fact that it will be a constant savings that you'll be creating for your citizenry.
Yeah, and it makes sense to sort of ask that question in the first place. Where can we save money in the first place to actually implement a strategy like this? Wes, what was your, budget discussions at the beginning when you were trying to get this happening and get the ball rolling?
The initial conversations were, it was we're a big enough corporation that we have our own in-house corporate performance and innovation shop. So we expanded that team a little bit to incorporate myself, and we had a couple consultants. But at the same time, we had, I think, a staff of 3 supporting the rollout to a corporation, $1 billion corporation with 7,000 employees. So that investment sort of happened, with it, and it was driven under our city manager's office. So under the head of our CIO, who, and that demonstrated the commitment to the program. But the whole idea goes back to how are you spending those dollars wisely? Joanne pointed out, don't pay it to a Big 4 consulting firm to tell you, consider reducing the number of grass cuts, which I think was an actual review from the city of Toronto back in 2010. We knew that was unsustainable over the long run. Part of the burning platform to actually introduce lean related to our council's desire to undertake a core services review by a Big 4 consulting firm. And so we've actually proven that a small investment over time in empowering staff and teaching others about continuous improvement and developing this transformation has reaped way more dividends than a report that's gathering dust that turns into a giant paperweight.
And ensuring that everybody has come along for the ride and all of your people and your culture are in the right place so that they want to implement this sounds like a fairly crucial part.
There is a small investment that is required up front, but over the long run, you have to be willing to take that leap of faith as an executive and being able to sell that to your council. And if you are on a council, believing in this transformation, it's going to be able to reap dividends, and you are going to get your payback in multiples over an extended period of time.
Alexis, I've seen one example which just talks about the incentives that maybe can be provided, which helps. And I'm not suggesting that the state governments need to fund us, but it's one that just drove a really good outcome for us. It's in New South Wales. It's called the Public Spaces Legacy Program, and it was effectively an offer to the majority of councils. I know certainly through Metropolitan Sydney. I'm not sure about the rest of the state, whereby if we made certain productivity improvements in our processes around development assessment, we were all eligible for a fairly significant contribution to a major open space project. And it's been a really interesting process. We needed to achieve a 15% improvement. It's amazing how that actually brought the executive team together, because we could all see this really clear benefit that we could get from doing that project. And it actually brought the divisions closer together, particularly in working through the challenges. And Wes talked a little bit about, the old referral system of development applications out to all of those different specialist planners. We're able to use that process to just cut straight through and just go, guys, we've got $4 million at stake here. If we can all get this working together, we're going to get some great projects that we can go and deliver for the community. And we've been successful. Literally, I got a letter this week saying we've qualified and we're going to get the funds coming our way. So it was just, and it's not suggesting here that it should be driven by another level of government. I suppose what I'm saying is that it was the incentive that was there that everyone saw value in, has meant the whole team has actually come together and worked on improving some process. And really, realistically, we invested not much more than a bit of time from senior teams, planners, and all of the referral sort of parts of the organisation, a bit of process review, a bit of trial and error, and the system seems to be working really, really well for us. So that's just an example of just provide the incentive, and it seems that the teams have risen to the challenge.
Sorry, I was muted there. What a great way to finish off the conversation with some real life examples on how we can see that this can be implemented and the best way to do it. I'd like to thank all of our panellists today. You've been listening to Joanne Jacobs, who's the co-CEO at Disruptors Co, Wes Anderson, who's the Manager of Financial and Treasury Services at the City of Mississauga, and Stephen Head, the General Manager at Hornsby Shire Council. Now, I've just popped into the chat some information. The chat seems to not be playing with me at the moment, so I'm going to give you some information verbally. So if you've got any questions on lean training on how to get started, the LEI group are here to support you, and the best place to look for the information is via the LEI group website, which is leigroup, or one word, .com.au. That's leigroup.com.au, and you can also get in touch with the event organisers today if you need any more information as well. Thank you so much to our panellists. I've learned something. I'm sure all of our listeners have learned something as well, and I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us.